dramatic news about Representative Nancy Mace. And it has to do with January 6th, the topic that she has often popped up in commentary around. And I'm gonna remind you of a few of the things that she had to say about January 6th early on. But in this case, what we have is 3 different sources, apparently who had worked for Nancy Mace, who have revealed that on just her 3rd day as a congresswoman, when, of course, the insurrection began and people began to rampage through the Capitol, she had a plan. And the plan was, according to 3 sources, to go out there, confront the protesters, and intentionally get punched in the face. That's what they said. An aide said she literally begged us to let her leave the office and head to the floor so she could, quote, get punched in the face and, quote, get media attention. That's word for word what she requested. The source continued that there were several of us in the office who heard it. Multiple sources talking to the Daily Beast saying this is what she wanted to do. And I think this is the most fascinating news possible because there are so many different potential explanations for why she would want to do that. Remember, she has been, up until recently at least, a little bit of a critic of Donald Trump, a little bit more of a critical voice. She'd previously in this race been calling for a new voice. Now she is endorsing Trump. So she's sort of moved back into the MAGA fold, but that wasn't her natural place to begin with. So was she going out there to confront what she actually saw as Trump supporters, to present herself as a brave, bold defender of democracy? Was she going to be attacked by them and then claim, as many did, that it was in fact provocateurs or Antifa, and she was standing up against a rampaging left that was trying to smear Donald Trump? I have a lot of theories, but David, I want you to jump in. Do you buy this story? It has 3 sources. Do you buy it? And what do you think was the thought process here if you do?
So I definitely buy it. My armchair psychologist in me would have a field day with Nancy Mace and her ego and her id. I think it's been clear for the last several months that Nancy Mace is what we would call a media whore. She loves the attention. She was the woman who wore the scarlet letter A, not understanding what that really meant, about a week after she voted to vacate the chair and get rid of the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and she was one of 8 Republicans to do so, and she got pilloried by a lot of Republicans, and so she wore this A around the Capitol for a day as if somehow voting against McCarthy was the same as adultery and the shame of all of that in that book that clearly she had never read. So she's somebody who loves the media attention. She is somebody who probably, I'm sure she was trying to figure out at the time that this was happening, how can she leverage this? How can she take advantage of this for her? Did she really want to get punched in the face? I don't know necessarily about that, but I think she wanted something to happen and maybe somebody to record it so that her sort of fame would then skyrocket and she could be the sort of celebrity that I think she wants to be.
Yeah, that ties into another story having to do with her, which everybody stay tuned. I'm gonna bring that up and I delight in being able to do so. But first, I will also say, if this is true, then it gives sort of a window into what she thought and maybe what other congresspeople thought the nature of the insurrectionists was, in that, like, she didn't appear, if this is true, to think that they were murderous. That if she went out there and got attacked, that she might literally be sexually assaulted, she might be murdered, she might be killed barehanded by this crowd, who at this point was already trying to beat cops to death, were trying to tear down the barricades as guns were pointed at their heads. She apparently thought she could go out there and just get punched in the face. So is that misplaced bravery, or is that not getting the actual threat that this crowd posed? What do you think? Or am I overthinking this?
No, I think that's a really important point, because I think for certain members of Congress, they did look at this not as sort of a violent insurrection, but they just thought, okay, people have broken through the lines, they're parading through the Capitol, they shouldn't be here, but it's not such a big deal. Certain members of Congress, that was their experience. Other members of Congress saw the mob chanting, hang Mike Pence, and wanting to literally kill Nancy Pelosi. So there's a much more sort of violent fringe that they saw. Again, I think maybe Nancy Mace wasn't really thinking so much about how dangerous or not it was, but she was so focused on herself and creating a name for herself and being able to sort of step up in the way. You think about when Steve Scalise got shot at a baseball practice for Republicans. Steve Scalise suddenly became overnight like an international celebrity in terms of US politics, a guy who a lot of people had never heard of. And I think there's more than a few members of Congress who have thought, okay, I would kind of like to be that person who gets shot and survives, or gets hit in the face and survives, and suddenly that catapults you. I mean, think about Marion Barry, the former mayor of Washington. One of the reasons that he rose to fame, I think in the 1980s, he was literally shot. Somebody tried to kill him. He survived that and sort of rode that attention to become mayor of Washington, D.C. There is a certain cachet for lawmakers, for politicians who can survive literally having their life threatened. And I'm sure, not sure, but I'm pretty much convinced that Nancy Mace, because of her own self-love and how much she thinks about herself and how perhaps savvy she thinks she is with the media, saw an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that that's probably the simplest and most accurate explanation. And I think, look, I don't know how you escape this forever influencing how people see you. And by the way, everything that you do from now on, they go on in the article to talk about how she was putting pressure on her team to put out a press release every day about whatever. She's not doing anything. Just put out press release. Make sure the media is talking about me. Book me on a TV show every single day. She is not alone in this. There are many Congress people that seem to think that being on Fox News or hosting a podcast is like the be all end all of being in elected government. Forget the legislation, the committee hearings, meeting with constituents, constituent services, things like that. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to talk to the media. But like this goes, I think, beyond even that. And it also makes some hypocrisy from early in her first term, I think, even worse, because many people probably will not remember this. But in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, she went on a podcast and she talked about how she was ready to go out and fight to defend herself. And then the Republicans largely turned away from being critical of Donald Trump and being critical of the rioters, and suddenly being one of those Republicans that took seriously what was happening on January 6th was no longer in vogue. And at that point, you might recall that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did an interview where she talked about her experience on January 6th. And she talked about the absolute dread, the overwhelming fear that she experienced that she could die on that day or that she could be raped on that day. For context, she's already talked about her experience that she is a survivor of sexual assault. And she talked about how horrified she was about what could happen to her. And at this point, remember, the right had been fetishizing and vilifying her for multiple years. The idea that this crowd would be particularly brutal towards her makes all the sense in the world. And after revealing that, Nancy Mace came out and attacked AOC, called her a liar, implying there was never any danger to you. You weren't in any danger. Why are you trying to make this about you? Why are you trying to center yourself on January 6th? And when she did that, we now find out that's like a month after she considered throwing herself into the crowd to center herself on January 6th. So she was willing to imply that a survivor of sexual assaults, fears of sexual assault, were just self-promotion when she wanted to get slugged in the face so she could get on Fox News. Yeah, she is one of the worst hypocrites in Congress and deserves way more criticism than she's getting.
And I think there's also maybe a certain amount of projection that we're seeing here. And again, not to delve too much into psychology, but there's Nancy Mace. We know that perhaps she regretted not somehow throwing herself out there, not getting punched in the face, not somehow being a victim so she could have her media star rise. And all of a sudden she sees, well, there's AOC talking about legitimate fears that AOC has. And that triggers in Nancy Mace and a sort of a loathing, because not just of AOC, but just because, well, I really wanted to have something happen to me. And now all of a sudden AOC is getting some attention because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had legitimate fears about what was gonna happen on January 6th. And that sort of triggers something in Nancy Mace that causes her to sort of go off. So yeah, I mean, there's again, a psychologist would have a field day with Nancy Mace, and unfortunately, the constituents that she has in her home state, this is who is representing them. Somebody who is this not only hypocritical, but is this easily triggered and is this narcissistic, and that's really frightening.
100%. Okay, well, she denies it, of course. I would if I were her too. But again, multiple sources, I guess they're just out to get you. I guess all these people that used to work for you are just out to get you, and it's probably a deep fake or something. Yeah, whatever. For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.